Welcome back to Chef Share at El Paso Community College. I'm Chef Rosser, and today we're going to be going through moist heat cooking applications. Now with moist heat, it's not the glamorous, sexy saute or grilling, whatever you might think of as the chef kind of life, but these moist heat cooking objectives are extremely important in the kitchens. So today we're going to be going through 5 different stages of moist heat cooking applications. We're going to start with blanching and shocking, and this is more of a preparation type step. We're also going to be doing poaching. Now the poaching is usually temperature range between 140 to up to 180, depending on the product you're poaching and what your needs are from that product. We're next going to go into simmering, and that's anywhere from 180 to about 200 degrees, 210. So that simmering is that nice, gentle cooking that is not too high or too low. We're going to go then into boiling, and we're going to demonstrate boiling. And there's some misnomers when it comes to moist heat applications, because we say things like hard-boiled eggs or boiled potatoes when really they're simmered. So we'll go through that and the differences. Then we're going to go into this steaming applications. Now steaming is above 210 degrees where water turns into a vapor. All right, so I hope you enjoy this. And if you're liking these videos, please click like or subscribe, and please let us know if there's something in the future that you'd like to see. Let's get started. So the first section that we're going to talk about when we're talking about moist heat cooking applications is blanching and shocking. Why? Because this is done every day in professional kitchens, and this is a method whereby we put products, and it's usually vegetable products, into boiling salted water briefly, just to start the cooking process. We'll take them out of that boiling salted water and put them into ice water. So the boiling salted water is the blanch part. The shock part is putting them in the ice water, and what that effectively does is it stops that cooking process. We are only partially cooking these products. We do this in the restaurants because we want to prepare for service, have everything ready, which is known as our mise en place, and from there we can finish these items to order. So the first thing I'm going to go through for you as far as a demonstration is a tomato concasse. And a tomato concasse is a blanched, peeled, seeded, and diced tomato. So we like using Roma tomatoes in the food service industry because they have a relatively thick flesh, and they're easy to do the segments on, and you'll see when I do this. So just to prep the tomato before we blanch it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the stem end out from the top, and then just get my utility knife and cut that stem end out just like that. And then on the opposite end, I'm just going to do a very shallow crossing cut. And what this is going to do is it's going to help me to peel this tomato easier. I will show that again. Get the stem end out, and my knife's doing all the work but not moving, so I'm moving that around. And then that crossing cut on the bottom, you just want to go through the skin. You don't want to go too deeply into the flesh, and I hope you guys can see that. All right, I've got my salted water boiling here in the back. I'm going to give it a crank, get that really nice and rolling, and then I'm going to drop my tomatoes in. Now remember, when you're doing these moist heat applications, make sure you're not dropping anything in from a height. I say drop it in, but I'm going to use this slotted spoon just to lower them into the water. If we start splashing stuff, we can get burned. So we want to keep our safety precautions in place. So this is a very quick process, and we'll go ahead and start that now. What we're looking for from this product is we're looking for the skin to loosen up and just start peeling back. Oftentimes what we'll see is those cuts that we've started from that crossing cut will extend. You'll see a tear in the skin. That pretty much lets us know that we are ready for those tomatoes to come out and go into our shock bath or our ice bath that I have in place right next to my stove, because I don't want to be moving this stuff around too much. Okay, we're going to check these tomatoes. They've been in about 10 seconds, and I see some of these tears extending on there. These tomatoes are a little green. They're commercial tomatoes, so they don't have a lot of flavor. They tend to be underripe when we get them. However, by treating them this way, we get a lot more flavor and texture out of them. So that's another great reason to use this technique, either at home or in the restaurants. All right, and I'll bring this over to you guys so you can see this, and you see how that tear has extended by itself in the blanch. So I'm going to put this in my ice water. Check my other tomato, which was just a little greener, and it looks ready too. So there, the cooking process has stopped. That tomato is not going to get soggy. It's not going to get mushy from overcooking. We should have a nice, firm, fleshed product, and we'll start with that now. So I'm going to get my tomato out of the ice bath. You just want to make sure that it cools down completely to where you're not going to hurt yourself when you pick it up. I'm going to move this over to my cutting board. You see it's cool to the touch, so I can work with that. I'm going to get my knife, and I'm going to peel that skin back, and you see how easily that comes off. And sometimes you'll get some sticking on there, and you just have to go back and work at it a little bit. And if the tomato gets really mushy, you may not want to use it depending on the preparation. If you're going to make a sauce out of your concassé, it's perfectly fine. But if you want it for a plate garnish, you just be careful not to overcook it. All right, so there my skin is all off. I've got my naked tomato. What I'm going to do is quarter it lengthwise. So cut it in half, and then cut those in half. Get all my scrap off the board. And then I'm going to come in from the stem end, or from the very end where I made the cross, and I'm going to cut the seeds and the center portion out. Take my seeds out, and this is what's known as a tomato fillet. It's a really nice, clean, just the flesh of the tomato. And you may be thinking, why are we going to take the seeds and guts out of the tomato? Well, the seeds can be bitter in cooking preparations. They can also add a lot of moisture, unwanted moisture, to something like a sauce, and it would just take a very long time to thicken up. So if you want a really nice tomato product, whether it's for garnishing or making a sauce, you really want to consider doing this method of preparation, making a concassé. So once I have my tomato fillets, to finish this concassé, I'm going to dice it. So I'm just going to cut long strips in one direction and then dice it in the opposite direction. And this is a pretty small dice. You can cut them larger if you like. I'll finish these for you guys so you can see how much product we get out of a single tomato. And remember, I did 2 tomatoes, so it would be double that. But this is a fairly easy preparation to do. This makes great sauces, great plate garnish. I love adding something like this to sauteed spinach to give it some color, some acidity, some flavor. All right, there we go. Let me move that out of the way. And that is our concassé tomato. So the next item that we are going to be blanching and shocking is a carrot bâtonnet. Now, carrots are a very firm vegetable, so we need to pre-cook them slightly in order to make them easier to use for service. So we're going to do the blanching and shocking method again with these. They're relatively firm. This is a bâtonnet. This cut is 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch by 2 to 2.5 inches long. So I've got a nice pile of those. I've got my blanching water coming up to heat. And once that comes to a full boil, I'm going to put these in. And much like the tomatoes, I'm going to cook these very briefly. And all I'm looking to do is soften them up a bit. The salted water is also going to help start bringing the natural flavors out. And it's also, by blanching and shocking, we are locking in nutritional value. Now, after those are blanched and shocked, they would go on to your station to be finished to order, whether it's a saute, glazing, whatever the case is, roasting maybe. So this is a great preparation step to use. Let's check our water. And our water is coming up to that full rolling boil. We're going to go ahead and get this in. And that's going to be in there for about 30 seconds because it's a fairly sizable cut. And once that is done, we're going to take that out and get that into our ice bath that we've got set up already. And then those will be ready for service. Now, when you're doing the blanching and shocking, especially on a hard vegetable like these carrots, you want to make sure that for service, if you're going to use them with a dry heat, if you're going to finish them with a dry heat cooking method like a saute, use a paper towel to dry them off. because if you have a hot saute pan with some oil in it, you put that wet vegetable in there and it's going to splatter and pop. So pat them dry before you do that. Again, just a little bit of a safety tip there. All right, so we're going to check our carrots now. They're boiling nicely. And I have a strainer here. You can use tongs, it doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and start pulling these out for you guys. I hope that you guys can see the shot. I'm just grabbing them, big wads of them, so that I can get them into my ice bath, get some of them in, come back and get the rest. And it's that easy. And what you'll notice, and I'll show you guys in just a minute, is that these have a really beautiful bright orange color because this blanching and shocking technique helps lock in color and nutritional value. So again, it's all positive with this, and it speeds up the finished preparation of this product when it's to order. Right? So I'm going to bring this over here and we'll take one out. We'll take a few of these guys out, and you can see how bright and vibrant they look after this blanching and shocking technique. So they're a little brighter, they're slightly softened, but they still have a nice crunch to them. Remember, they were only partially cooking them this way, and then we're going to finish them to order in whatever manner we have them posted on our menu. All right? So hope you enjoy that. Try blanching and shocking at home. So the next objective we're going to move on to is poaching. Now, poaching is a little misunderstood because it's a low temperature, moist heat cooking application. So what I'm going to do with you guys is something we're all familiar with, is poached eggs. And we're going to want to cook those. Remember that poaching range is anywhere between 140 to 180 degrees, right? So it's a nice gentle heat, just kind of like a warm bath. Now eggs cook at about 160 degrees, and I've temped my water here and I'm right where I need to be. What I've done with the water, rather than adding salt for poached eggs, I added a little bit of vinegar. And what vinegar does with poached eggs is it helps the egg whites coagulate so that they don't become stringy and it looks like egg drop soup. We want them to hold together as much as possible. Now that can be difficult depending on how fresh the eggs are or how old they are. So let's go ahead and check this out. One thing that I always like to do is, one, let my eggs come up to as close to room temperature as I can, so that the temperature range that they have to travel through is not too great, and then crack them into a bowl. Why do I crack them into a bowl before I put them in the water? Because I don't want any shells. If I get an egg shell in there, what's going to happen is it'll stay in the bowl after I dump the egg into the poaching water. All right, so we'll go ahead and start with that. Get my egg in there and no shells. One of the things that I like to do with my poaching is right before I'm going to put the egg in, I'm going to turn up the water just a little bit because the temperature of the egg is going to be much lower than the water. So I turn it up just a little bit to compensate for that, and I'll give my water just a little bit of a swish so that this doesn't sink to the bottom and just stick. As soon as it's in, you can see it starting to swirl, and I just want to gently wave the water underneath it so that it doesn't stick to the bottom. And yes, some of the egg white is going to kind of drift off of it, and we don't want to serve that, but we don't want to disrupt the water so much that all of the egg white kind of strips off the yolk. So I'm just going to gently move that water while it's poaching, and you see the cooking happening immediately. And the water will get kind of murky. So if you're doing this in a restaurant, you're going to have to be swapping out your water. What I always do is have the one I'm working on and have a backup ready. As soon as I go to the backup, I get the next one ready. It just makes for much easier continuous service. Right? So what are we looking for from the poached egg? Well, we're looking for the white to be set at very least. Now, depending on how a customer orders their poached egg, they may want it with a runny yolk, so poached soft. Poached medium means that yolk is barely starting to set, but it will still have a good deal of softness to it, maybe a little bit of run. And then poached hard is obviously egg white and yolk fully cooked. Now it can be a little tricky because egg whites and egg yolks coagulate at different temperatures. Egg whites coagulate at about 10 degrees lower, about 155 degrees, and egg yolks coagulate at about 165 degrees. So that's how we can make eggs that have a fully cooked white and a runny yolk at the same time. So I'm going to come in and check this, just gently move it in the pan, and it's almost ready for a soft poach. And when I take this thing out, what I want to do is dry it off slightly, make sure I don't get any of that stringy egg white in there. I just want that solid, the center portion of the egg. Any whites that kind of drift off, I don't want to include those on a plate. It can look kind of funky. And remember, turning up the water just before you add your egg really helps with the coagulation process, speeds it up tremendously because it compensates for the heat lost from putting the egg in the water. One thing I like to do is just gently turn that egg over because that helps me see how it's cooking, and I will just gently flip it like that, and it helps it move around through the column of water as well. All right. And I think we have a nice soft poach right here. So what I'm going to do is lift that out of my water very gently. You have to be extremely careful with these. I always have my dry paper towels, and to dry this off, I'm just going to set my spoon on top of my dry paper towels and wick away some of that moisture from the bottom, and then gently tap it on the top. Then I can place it on my plate. And there is my beautiful, perfect, soft poached egg. And this would be great for something like a Eggs Benedict, go with poached salmon, whatever the case is. And you can tell just by looking at it, it's got a little bit of jiggle. The white is just set and the yolk is nice and runny. And I'll show you that beautiful kind of cross cut. I'm just going to cut into it and pull it apart. There's your perfect poached egg. The next poaching objective that we're going to talk about is we're going to poach a chicken supreme or a boneless, skinless chicken breast. Now we're all familiar with those. However, we don't typically cook those with moist heat. But what I'm going to show you is a great way to cook the chicken with moist heat applications to get it moist, juicy, flavorful. And we're also going to have a wonderful sauce to make out of the poaching liquid known as a Cuisson. But first thing we need to do is get a nice saute pan that is big enough to hold our protein and a little bit of the extra liquid. I'm also going to get a piece of parchment paper to make the lid. And the lid is known as a cartouche. And this is just an old school French methodology where we're going to make a lid to hold in enough heat to cook that product evenly, but also vent just enough steam. And I'm going to go through that with you. So I'm going to fold this corner to corner, use my knife to cut off the trim. What I'm going to do is make a snug fitting lid for this saute pan. So corner to corner, I've got a nice square in there, and then corner to corner again. And this does not have to be perfect. You can do these relatively quickly, or if you have a good fitting lid for your pot, that's great. However, in the restaurants, this is a much easier way. So I'm going to keep folding until I get just a sliver of it. I'm going to measure it to my pan. I want the center of this to be in the center of the pan. Then I'm just going to trim the outside to make my lid. Really easy. I'm also going to cut the hole just to vent a little bit of steam. So both ends of that. I open it back up. There is my cartouche, and it fits nicely over that pan. I want it to be a little bigger, remember, to hold in heat. The next thing I'm going to do with my cartouche is I'm going to butter the paper so we don't get it, so it does not stick to the protein. And I've got a little soft butter here and my pastry brush, and I'm just going to work from the center out and lightly butter this paper. And once your paper is nicely buttered up, make sure you put the buttered side down onto the protein that is poaching, okay? So the next item I have here is my pre-made Cuisson. And this Cuisson is just a flavorful cooking liquid. And this is a mixture of mirepoix, remember that mixture of aromatic vegetables, celery, carrots, and onion. 50% onion, 25% celery and carrot, and it's diced very small. I've got a little fresh thyme, chicken stock, and white wine, and a little salt and pepper in there. So really simple, beautiful cooking liquid. So I'm going to just ladle some of this into the bottom of my pan. And it's been on the stove, so it's nice and warm. Remember, I don't want this to get above 170 degrees, 180 degrees. All we need for that chicken to do is come above 165 degrees, because that is the required cooking temperature for poultry products. All right, let's set this aside. I'm going to put this on the stove and just get it to the temperature I want it. And the interesting thing about the shallow poaching technique is I'm going to finish this in the oven. So once my chicken breast goes in there, I'm going to put that in the oven with the cartouche on there and let that cook down. Once that's cooked down, I'm going to remove my chicken breast. I'm going to put it somewhere nice and warm and moist. So I'll put it on a plate, cover it with plastic, and then reduce that Cuisson or that cooking liquid down to a sauce consistency. I can finish it with some heavy cream. I could add a little beurre manier to thicken it up. However we want to finish that sauce, very easy to do that and have a really beautiful plated presentation. All right, we'll finish this in just a second. So for the shallow poach of the chicken, I have got my nice supreme here, which is a boneless, skinless breast. I'm just going to get a little salt and pepper on it. I've got my Cuisson in the pan. You see it's nicely steaming. There's a little bit of movement in the water. That tells me that it's at the right temperature of about 160 degrees. I'm going to get this into my poaching liquid or my Cuisson. Just lay it in there. And now for shallow poaching, you only want your cooking liquid to come about halfway up the side of the product. And for that, that's perfect. I'm going to get my cartouche on top, gently push it down, and be careful because everything in here is nice and hot. And then I'm going to finish this in the oven. And depending on how big that piece of chicken is, this should take about 6 to 10 minutes, depending. This is a fairly small chicken breast, so we'll set a timer for about 8 minutes, and then we'll check that out. Okay, so now that our shallow poach has done its thing in the oven, and it's done, let's go ahead and get this out and take a look at it. All right, so I'm going to take my cartouche off, and it's nicely, it got a little hot in there, but that's okay. This will be just fine. What I'm going to do is put that on a plate and cover it with another plate so it stays warm and steamy in there. We're done with our cartouche, and with the cooking liquid, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn up my heat on this and reduce that down. So with reduction, what I'm doing is concentrating all of those flavors that are already there. So by evaporating water off, so that's going to concentrate the flavors that are already there. And once it gets to the right consistency, I'm going to finish it with butter. And that's known as monte au beurre, mounting with butter. And what that's going to do for that finished sauce is give it a nice, silky, creamy, buttery finish, and then it'll have that beautiful fresh butter flavor. All right, and I've got my chef's favorite ingredient here, room temperature cubed butter to do that. So I want to reduce this by about half. I only need really about 1 ounce to 1.5 ounces of sauce for a piece of chicken that size. So I've got my heat all the way up. It's at a rapid boil. And I'm just looking for that reduction to happen. And Too bad we don't have smell-o-vision because it really smells amazing right now. That's the white wine, the aromatics, the chicken stock, a little bit of thyme. Beautiful, beautiful. You'll have a great plated presentation. Now this can also be, we can also use the same methodology to do fish. However, if we're doing fish, we want to start maybe with just some water, white wine, some aromatic vegetables, our mirepoix, and a little citrus. I like squeezing half a lemon in there and then throwing the whole lemon rind and everything in there to create kind of a court bouillon is what that's known as. And that would be a really nice fish poaching. Now obviously the cooking temperatures for fish and chicken are drastically different, right? So that fish you really want it at about 130, 140 max, whereas the chicken, just to eat it safely, it has to reach at least 165 degrees. So if we cooked fish to that temperature, it would just fall apart and die. It would not be even worth eating at that point. So just remember, same methodology with fish and chicken as far as the shallow poaching technique. However, we're going to cook it for a much shorter amount of time and probably stovetop, start to finish, with the fish. So turning our attention back to our sauce, it's almost reduced to the point where I'm happy with it. And once it's there, I'm just going to do the Monteo burr, and I'm going to turn off my heat at that point. I don't want to put the butter into a pan that is still heating because it will break. It will turn into a greasy mess. The grease will, the fats will separate to the top. What I want to do is keep it emulsified. Butter naturally is an emulsion. It's there's water and fat base combined in there, and I want it to do that with the sauce so we have a nice creamy, silky sauce. Right? So at this point, I'm going to call it done. I'm going to get my room temperature butter, and it's getting a little warm, but that's okay. And I'm going to get about a tablespoon and a half in there, and I'm just going to swirl it in. Just get in my pan and gently swirl it in. And you'll see that the consistency of the sauce changes slightly, but it gets a little murky as that butter melts into it. And it's going to give it that beautiful sheen and color and flavor that we're looking for. And to finish this chicken, all I'm going to do is take my beautiful Cuisson liquid and just gently spoon it over there. I could get this a little thicker if I reduced it more, or if I added a thickening agent. But that's nice. It's going to have a nice natural flavor to it, and you're going to get all of those beautiful aromatic qualities of that, along with the silky, smooth texture of the butter. Now the next objective I'm going to demonstrate for you is hard-boiled eggs. Now we say hard-boiled, but we want to cook these at a simmer. If we used a full rolling boil with eggs, what we're going to end up doing is cracking the shells. And if you've ever done that at home, it can be a huge mess. So what we want to do is keep it at about between 190 to 200 degrees. We don't want it at that full rolling boil. So I've got my water ready over here. Again, like I did with the poach, I'm going to turn up the water just before I put my eggs in. My eggs have been sitting out at room temperature for a little bit because remember, I don't want that temperature difference to be so great that these take a long time to cook. So just like the poached eggs, I don't want to drop these in. So I'm going to use a slotted spoon just to drop them into my hot water, and I'm going to bring that to a simmer. Once that's at a simmer, then I'm going to start my timer. And for hard-boiled eggs, it's going to be roughly 10 minutes depending on the size of the egg. Now if you have those big jumbo eggs, you may want to do 12 minutes. For these are like, I think they're labeled as large, but really they look like mediums to me. But we'll call this 10 minutes. So and remember, these are more of a simmer than a hard boil. That's just kind of a label that's put on them. We don't want to boil them like we think we would with pasta, just because we're going to damage the product and they'll probably end up overcooking. We'll come back and check these in a little bit. So our hard-boiled eggs have been going for about 6 minutes. I wanted to take the opportunity to show you what the water should look like with this downward shot. We should see a few bubbles in the water. We should see a good shimmer on the surface and definitely steam coming off. And that's what we have here. If we were at a full rolling boil, remember these eggs they're not going to stand up to that, especially if they're really cold, because that temperature difference can cause the shell to crack as the protein inside the egg coagulates. So we've got a couple more minutes on these. I put an ice bath next to the stove so that I can get those in there. We can cool them down, stop that cooking, just like we did with the blanching and shocking. We want to stop that cooking process. If we leave them in that hot liquid, even with it off, they tend to overcook. And that brings us to a really good talking point. How can you tell if hard-boiled eggs are overcooked? Now, if you have ever made hard-boiled eggs and they get a little gray around the outside of the yolk, or when you cut them, they have that kind of halo around the yolk, that means that they're overcooked. The entire yolk should be that kind of bright yellowish. As they overcook, that tends to gray out from the outside of the yolk in. So hopefully I come up with a good product, no pressure, right? So we've got about a minute and a half left on this, and then we'll take a look at them after they cool down. So the eggs have been in the water for about eight and a half minutes now. I'm gonna go ahead and take these out. Put them in my ice water. I can turn my pot off, and I want to let these ice for about 5-10 minutes at the most, and then they'll be ready. We want the heat to dissipate out of the eggs from the outside in, so that takes about 5 to 10 minutes. We'll come back and look at these. So our hard-boiled eggs have been sitting in the ice water for about 10 minutes. The next thing we're going to do is just check these. So on my cutting board, start the cracking, and I like to give it just a really light roll, and that usually helps the shells come off easier. Also, having wet fingers helps. I've got a dish here to put everything into. And if you're wondering what kind of eggs you should use for hard-boiled, always older eggs work better because they tend to, the membrane tends not to stick. So if you've ever peeled a hard-boiled egg and half of the egg comes off with the shell, you may want to set those out on your countertop overnight before you cook them. Give them a little age at room temperature, and it really helps. Also, letting your eggs come up to room temperature before you hard-boil them really helps as well. So the shell came off intact. It's a nice-looking egg. I'm just going to cut it in half and show you the interior of that. So I've got a nice yolk. It's fully set and no graying around the yolk. That's really important to see that your hard-boiled eggs are not overcooked, because if that yolk gets overcooked, it gets dry, crumbly, turns gray. You really want it to have some flavor and moisture left in it. Okay? Good luck with hard-boiled eggs. Okay, so here for the simmering objective, I have some chuck roast, and the chuck comes from the shoulder of the beef. And this is a well-exercised, fairly tough cut. There's some good marbling, lots of connective tissue. Now that does a couple of things for this piece of protein. One, it makes it very flavorful, but two, it also makes it tough. So we need to extend that cooking period for a longer amount of time and keep it lower. If we tried to cook this like a steak, it would be like eating a rubber band. So we're going to go ahead and do the simmering, and remember that simmering is about 180 degrees, and always make sure to use your thermometer to check your water. What you're looking for from the water that you're working with is just a nice shimmer on the surface, maybe a few bubbles. You don't want that full rolling boil. So to go with my chuck, and I've cut this fairly large, kind of for like a soup preparation like caldo, I'm going to add some aromatic vegetables known as mirepoix, and that's 2 parts onion, 1 part carrot, 1 part celery by weight to this, and then let it cook down in my lightly salted water. So let's go ahead and get this in. I'll add my beef first, and then we'll come and get the mirepoix in. And I don't want to splash this in because I don't want to burn myself, so I'm just going to tong it in per piece, and then I'll put in my mirepoix. And just make sure it's not sticking together. Gently wave it in there. The cooking process starts immediately, but it takes a long time. So you really want to simmer this for about an hour total before you check it. It may take longer, it may go quicker, depending on how that product is cut. And we'll come back and take a look at this and we'll show you what the finished product should look like. So our chuck has been going for about an hour and 15 minutes. We're gonna take a look at it. Now these moist heat cooking applications are much quicker than dry heat cooking applications for certain items. So I'm gonna pull out one of my pieces of chuck. Now this looks really familiar if you're used to eating something like caldo de res. You have that nice big piece of meat, and it's got great color. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut this for you guys just to show you what we're looking for. It cuts very easily. It's nice and soft, and the really important part for this type of objective is that you're going to cook it to the desired consistency. Now, if I wanted this to shred for me, I would cook it longer, but I probably not less because it's just tender and edible. Remember, there's a lot of connective tissue here, so we want to give that time to break down at that really nice gentle temperature. So if I was doing like a shredded beef dish, I would cook this longer so that it would tear apart very easily, and we call that fork tender, to where you don't need a knife to cut it. But if I was going to add this to a soup preparation, this would be absolutely perfect. Now for boiling, what we're going to want to do is get our water at the highest temperature we can. So water is going to boil at about 220 degrees. We want our flame up as high as it'll go. We want to leave a little room in the top of our pot, especially with pasta, because as the carbohydrates kind of drift off of the pasta, it can cause foaming. You want a little room for that foam to expand. If your pot's too filled, it's going to boil over and you're going to have a tragic cleanup job to do. I've got some kosher salt. You really want to get plenty of salt into your pasta water to start that flavoring. So I'm going to get that in there. Get my pasta in there. I've got about 6 ounces here, and that's it. Now, depending on the style of pasta that you're making, that's going to dictate a couple of things. One, the cooking time, and two, how you're going to use it. Certain pastas are smooth, some are flat, some are tubes. So there's a whole world of pasta out there, but you got to know what you're using, know what's appropriate for what sauces. Here I'm cooking an elbow macaroni, so that's a really great pasta because it's hollow to hold a sauce. Even a thicker cheese sauce will hold to that very well. It'll go into that hollow space. It'll cling to the outside, especially with the curvature of it. So again, perfect for macaroni and cheese, something like that. This would not be so appropriate for like a wetter sauce, like the chicken Cuisson that we did earlier. If I was going to serve that with a pasta, I'd probably use something flatter and wider that's going to add to that plate presentation visually. But anyway, so I've stirred my pasta. Always make sure you give your pasta a stir after it goes in. You'll see the foaming happening. That's all a good sign. Now for this, don't be afraid to turn it down because it's boiling. The cooking process is happening, and I still get a nice full rolling boil just by turning it down. What I'm doing is just decreasing that foam. Once this pasta gets to the doneness that I like, and oftentimes in the restaurants, what will happen is we will only partially cook the pasta because we want to finish it with a sauce to order, right? Similarly to what we did with the carrots. We're going to cook it about 3/4 of the way, and then that last little bit of cooking is going to happen when the order comes in for that product. So we have a nice fresh product. One thing that I can do to this is similar to the blanching and shocking technique. To stop the cooking, I can just put ice in there and then strain it. I can also strain it and then put it into ice water and then drain it after that, just to make sure that the texture is exactly what I want it to be, especially if I'm going to finish this to order. Now, certain pasta dishes, some are going to be wetter, where you're going to get some absorption. You would want to undercook it to that al dente stage at that point. For something like macaroni salad, you would not want this al dente, so you're going to cook it a little further. So depending on what your needs are with that product is going to also tell you how long you're going to cook it. So for this, I'm going to go al dente.
So I'm going to check it by making sure that it's still got just a little bit of a bite to it before I stop the cooking process. And that full rolling boil is still happening. Usually this small elbow macaroni, it's going to take about 6-8 minutes. So our elbow macaroni has been going for about 8 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. And to stop the cooking process, I've just got some ice. The boil will stop as soon as you turn off the gas, right? But the cooking continues. So we want to stop the cooking process so we can get this drained and have a product ready to use. So I'm just going to use some ice, dump it in there. That's going to cool this down and stop that cooking process so much. And then I'm going to strain a little bit, and I'll show you that. I can put in as much ice or as little as I want. And then I'm going to take this to my sink and strain it out. But I will show you guys a little bit of this al dente pasta so we can get a camera shot. Here's our nice al dente pasta, just barely cooked, but ready to finish. So if I had a nice bechamel cheese sauce, this would be a perfect stage to put that warm sauce over that, pop it in the oven, get some more heat into it, crust up the top, and then serve. So one of the last objectives I'm going to show you today is we're going to talk about steaming, and I'm going to show you a very traditional French preparation of fish en papillote. And en papillote simply means in paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to turn a piece of parchment paper into a steam envelope that we're going to cook a piece of fish in. Now this is a very, very old school traditional method of cooking it's amazing. When we talk about steamed foods, we think about things like vegetables that are kind of bland in that preparation. So what I'm going to show you to do is make this envelope to put this fish in with all of our aromatics and vegetables and wine and butter to create a beautiful presentation. So I have half a piece of parchment paper here. I'm going to fold that in half again. And if you remember your kindergarten class, making a heart out of a piece of paper, we're going to do that same thing. So we're going to cut a heart out of here with our kitchen shears, and it's going to be a kind of a goofy shaped heart, and it does not have to be perfect. All we're looking to do is create an envelope to seal this product in. And when my chef in culinary school showed me this, my mind was blown. So again, there's our nice kindergarten paper heart. The next thing I'm going to do is get some of my soft butter. I'm going to brush both sides, both halves of the inside, not the outside. We're going to get some butter on there. And you're saying, Chef, why are you buttering the paper? A couple of reasons. One, we want that butter in there to help product not stick. It acts as a medium to transfer heat. So once this envelope fills up with steam, what happens to that butter is it combines with the moisture of the vegetables and the fish to create a sauce. And we're also going to add moisture in the form of white wine to this, just a splash to help give it some flavor and some acidity, so we have a nice bright kind of flavor profile for this. So both sides of my paper are buttered. Then I'm going to start layering my ingredients. I have a little thinly shaved carrot, and I just did this with a vegetable peeler. And everything that goes in here needs to be very delicate to cook very quickly. So this is just carrots done with a vegetable peeler. The next thing I'm going to do is put down a little shallot, little minced shallot or a brunoise of shallots. And shallots are a wonderful component in just about anything that they go into, especially if we're looking to have a sauce. I'm going to get a little bit of greens in there. I didn't have any spinach today, so I'm using salad greens, and they work perfectly fine in there, and they cook beautifully, just like spinach would. The next thing I have is my fish, my tilapia fillet. And I need to point something out to you with the tilapia fillet. There's two sides to it. There's that really smooth, kind of glassy side with that dark line. You want to make sure that that is down, because once this cooks, that darker line gets that kind of ugly gray to it. So that goes down. The presentation side that you want your guests to see is the inside of that fillet. So I'm going to get a little salt and pepper on the inside of the fillet. And don't be afraid to put the seasoning on there, because it has to flavor everything else. I'm going to lay that on top of my carrots, shallots, and greens. And then I'm going to get some more aromatics. We had some nice looking fennel here this week, so I just got the fennel fronds, and it's going to give it that earthy kind of anisette flavor profile. And anisettes kind of taste like licorice. So that's that. I've got a little chopped thyme, chopped fresh thyme. Gives you that fresh, kind of bright, earthy flavor. And then finally, I'm going to add a little bit of wine to the whole thing. And this is about a teaspoon of wine. You don't need a lot, because if you fold and seal this properly, no moisture is going to escape. This will puff up during the cooking process. And so what little moisture that is in there is perfectly enough for the entire presentation. And then I'm just going to put a couple of pieces of lemon on the top to give it some brightness and acidity. That's it. So the folding process to create that steam envelope, I'm going to fold this over really carefully and then start a rolling fold, right? So I'm going to crease it, seam it. I try to do it twice, and then I'm going to come all the way around this heart, folding that crease over, pushing that paper down, following that exterior curvature. And you need to make sure that your paper is about 2 to 3 times the size of the protein that goes inside, because this folding really takes up a lot of that excess paper. You want to make sure you're pushing that down really well. The butter is also going to help seal the paper if you get it out to the edges. And this does not have to be perfect. I've seen this done in restaurants oftentimes with aluminum foil, and aluminum foil is really nice. I like using parchment paper because it makes a presentation that you're really proud to serve to your guests table side. You just put it on a plate. Train your service staff to cut this open table side with the scissors. Really nice presentation. There's your fish and papillote. You can make a few of these ahead of time in a restaurant if you need them. If you're having a dinner party at home, you can make these and put them in the refrigerator up to a couple of hours ahead of time. Any longer than that, and the acid will start breaking down the fish, and things will get kind of funky as far as texture. This should go into a 425-degree oven for about 8 to 10 minutes. Depending on the size of the fish, the type of the fish. So if you're using something thicker like a salmon, you may want to go 12, 15 minutes at the most. So good luck with papillote. Remember, this should have a nice ballooned envelope look to it. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. Okay, our papillote's been in the oven for about 8-10 minutes. Let's go ahead and pull that out and take a look. All right, so you can see the color of the paper has changed fairly dramatically. It puffed up with our steam. I'm going to go ahead and slide this onto a plate to cut open for you. And the way I like to do this is just with a pair of kitchen shears. I start at one end and just cut directly above the seam. Be careful not to get your fingers around where you're cutting. This is extremely hot. And you can burn yourself very easily doing that. So for service presentation, I love taking this paper, rolling it under, and then there is our presentation. That would be what your guest sees. There's a little liquid in the bottom. Everything's nice and moist and juicy. It's a beautiful preparation. I highly recommend you try this in your restaurant or at home. Enjoy. So in the commercial kitchens, oftentimes we have large pieces of equipment that are very specialized, and this is one of them. This is a commercial steamer made by the Cleveland Company out of Ohio, right? Now these are great machines. They work on a closed loop, and they're steam generators. So the water that this thing turns into steam is at about 260 degrees. So it is really hot. Now these are great machines for reheating in bulk, for steaming large amounts of products. The uses of this machine are almost endless in a large commercial operation. The way they work, and there's some very important safety features that need to be followed. When these things are on and you're going to open them, always make sure you stand to one side of the door, right, to the back side of the door. The steam pouring out of here is, you can get a scalding burn from that very easily. Always make sure you have plenty of dry towels. I didn't turn this on because we weren't going to use it, but I thought it was worth talking about to see the piece of equipment. So stand to one side of the door, and it holds these what is known as hotel pans. This one is perforated, so this would be great to put beets in, whole beets, if I just wanted to start the cooking process. They fit right in there. Close that. Now there's a manual and a timed setting. So these are extremely convenient machines, and once you start using them, they're very, very efficient and easy to use.